Hello, Здравствуйте. I'm very pleased to be speaking with you this evening about teaching methods for students of the future. I will begin with a tiny bit of information about me. My name is Jennifer Eidum, and I am coming to you from Durham, North Carolina. For those of you who are interested in a little bit about myself, I grew up in Montana in the Western United States and completed my graduate education, including teaching English to speakers of other languages in the Seattle area. So if you're into accents, you may pick up on some of the ways I speak related to Western American English. Today, I am talking to you a little bit about teaching methods for students of the future. And really, what I thought about as I thought about my topic for today, it is really the question of what students and teachers need as we move into a future. And that raised the question of resilience, given the pandemic and many other challenges in the world. A lot of teachers in the US and abroad are talking about resilience. So I will explain a bit about what resilience is and why it matters for teachers, and then some methods for building teacher resilience, and then wrap up with some teaching practices for resilient schools and classrooms. I will make sure to leave a lot of time for question and answer because interaction is always the best part. So please use the chat to ask questions. I understand there's chat being monitored on multiple streaming platforms. So please just put in a question at any point and I will answer those questions towards the end. So again, thank you so much for joining me today. So again, as we look towards the future, there are a few different areas that come up in a lot of conversations at my university and across international education. The future of education around the world includes increasingly culturally and linguistically diverse students. We are seeing students from many backgrounds in our classes who may have multiple first languages or be speakers of many languages, and that creates new opportunities and new challenges in the classroom space. We also know that instability is becoming more and more normal, or perhaps has always been normal. But as we think about climate change and changing weather patterns, we think about the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, we think about all the other things happening in various parts of the world, we know that we can't always predict from day to day, week to week, year to year, what we or our students may be experiencing. We also know that there are significant socioeconomic divides. Um, Throughout the world, these divides can be very different, but I know, for example, in Russia, the urban-rural divide significantly impacts student outcomes. And if you're interested in the topic of resilience in Russia, I can connect you with some great resources about this question. And then finally, and really the thing I'm bringing to you today is an increased awareness of the social emotional needs of students. I think for a long time within school, we thought a lot about high standards for our students to set them up for success, and less attention was paid to students' emotional needs. And we're now recognizing through advanced psychology research, advanced educational research, as well as ongoing experience, we know that attending to the social emotional needs of students is essential for those high academic outcomes. So the premise I am coming to you today with is that developing resilient teachers, resilient students, and creating resilient school spaces can counteract a lot of the challenges that we know we will face in the future. So that brings me to the question of what is resilience and why does it matter? So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking through some definitions and some core concepts before I bring it to practice. So to begin, I'm starting with the concept of trauma because I came to this work from the field of trauma-informed teaching. Trauma is an event, a series of events, or sort of a set of social circumstances that are experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or threatening. Traumas have a lasting adverse effect on an individual's functioning. So it affects how they interact day to day, including their physical interactions, their social interactions with their peers, with their friends, with their colleagues, and their emotional interactions. And it can also affect their spiritual well being. So, trauma is the set of things people experience that affects their well being. Trauma can include natural disasters, gun violence, illness that someone experiences, or even in their family, an injury, a broken bone, maybe one that persists, they need surgery, something like a global pandemic, chronic illness that impacts them throughout their lives. Adverse childhood experiences. This is a category that often includes things like domestic abuse in the family, childhood abuse, other types of childhood experiences that a child may experience before they really even understand what they're experiencing. Domestic abuse, bullying, systemic racism, and so many other events and experiences that individuals encounter that affect their well being. And so, trauma informed teaching conceptually is a practice that provides students and ourselves with a sense of safety, connectedness, and hope. There is a lot of detail that I could go into about trauma informed teaching, and I would love to talk with you more about. But for today, we're going to look at trauma informed teaching as a classroom experience where we provide an environment where students are safe, where the colleagues are safe, they feel connected to each other, and they are hopeful about the future. If we think about it a little bit broader, trauma informed teaching is really about that community experience. So, helping a student feel safe, connected, and hopeful is important. But I know that I want to work and teach in places where all students and all colleagues feel that way. So that brings us to our key concept for today, which is resilience. And resilience itself can be defined as the process of capacity for or outcome of successful adaptation despite challenging or threatening circumstances. And it's really important to understand that it is a process, so meaning kind of the action towards being resilient, the capacity for, which is what we might work on when we're feeling healthy and good in our lives. We want to develop that capacity for resilience. And then also, when we have a challenging experience and we do adapt successfully, we can say, hooray, we were resilient. And I added this image of the bitterroot flower, which is the state flower of Montana, where I grew up, because it's this beautiful sort of cactus flower that grows only in rocky areas. And that reminds me of the resilience of working through traumatic or challenging times and developing a capacity to bounce back and see a better future. So, resilience itself, if we break it down and look at it in the teacher setting, resilience protects against stress. So, having it means that when we have a stressful circumstance, we have a capacity to maybe back away, or we have the tools to cope with stress. And stress, of course, are negative feelings about work as a teacher, negative feelings about school if you are a student. Burnout is a type of stress among professionals who deal extensively with the needs of other people. It includes emotional exhaustion, feelings of depersonalization, and reduced personal accomplishment. And if a teacher or a student is resilient, they again have a protective capacity against that burnout. Burnout is definitely a challenge in our profession, in all caring professions. And so, building a toolkit to prevent those extreme feelings of depersonalization and emotional exhaustion. And then finally, resilience is not simply an individual trait. One person can work really hard to develop their own resilience, but it is really hard to counter stress, counter burnout, counter trauma when you are alone. We rely on our communities for that capacity, and so recognizing that we need to develop it in our families, in our schools, and in our classrooms in order to prevent our own burnout and resilience is really, really important. So, resilient teachers, a lot of research has been done on the characteristics of resilient teachers, and what they report is a feeling of agency, the ability to make their own decisions in their classroom with their students. Resilient teachers also report that they have a strong support group, including their colleagues and caring leadership. The administration in their school cares about them and shows it. Additionally, resilient teachers report feeling pride in their own accomplishments and the accomplishments of their colleagues as well. And then finally, a feeling of competence in areas of personal importance. So they have this feeling that things are going right in the aspects of their life outside of their job. So when we think about it as a whole, resilient teachers have a lot of things. They have a community within their school. They have the opportunity to celebrate successes, be them big or small. They have a fulfilling life outside of the classroom, and they have the ability to make their own choices. Resilient students then are some of our best learners in the classroom. They are engaged learners. That doesn't mean that they are the best, like English speakers, the best of the subject, but that they come excited, enthusiastic, ready to learn, and thorough in their assignments. Resilient students additionally have caring and supportive adults in their lives. This could be teachers, this could be parents, this could be other family members, mentors, such as on a sports team, or other aspects of the community. So again, research on resilient students shows that they are active, engaged learners, and they have many supportive adults in their lives. And when we zoom out to the school setting, resilient schools are places where students from disadvantaged backgrounds, which may include low economic status, low educational and cultural resources, that the students who have sort of those metrics in their lives still achieve high educational outcomes. And a lot of research has been done on state tests and looking at schools that have disadvantaged backgrounds, looking at their test results. And when they look at these types of schools, resilient schools who produce those strong educational outcomes, the characteristics that they show are a safe and organized learning environment, that the students have a positive outlook, that is hope for the future, and they are involved in academic and non-academic activities, which gives them those mentors. And so what you can see throughout kind of the language and conversation here is that there are a number of factors, including teacher resilience, including that positive outlook and the school system, as well as having a robust sort of set of resources within the school and outside of the school, that we create these spaces where students have that safety, connectedness, and hope. So if we zoom out, resilient schools are places where teachers and students feel supportive to achieve their goals and feel hopeful about the future. That is my favorite sort of working definition of resilient schools. So the last piece I want to leave you with, sort of functionally as we think about definitions, is that for resilient students, it is a combination of individual factors and environmental factors. The individual factors are personality traits and learning sort of abilities and resources that students have, like confidence to learn, the knowledge and skills to be successful to meet their goals. Metacognition, which is a term we'll talk about later, but that's the ability to regulate their thinking behaviors, and then having intrinsic motivation, being motivated on their own to achieve goals. And then environmental factors, which are the things that teachers and administrators can affect. And that includes providing students with those safe, supportive adults, providing high expectations for students so that they feel supported and influenced to succeed, having supportive classmates, clear rules and boundaries within class. They know what they can do and what they cannot do. And finally, the trust and respect of the adults in their lives. And those things together create resilience for students, for schools, and for teachers. So this brings us to that second question. Why do we need resilience? Resilience helps people adapt to traumatic events. So if we're thinking about those sort of future instability that we now know is definitely here in our lives, resilience will help students and teachers and individuals adapt to that. Secondly, resilient teachers are happier. I think a lot about that as an educator. I want a good life for myself. I want a good life for my students, and I want to have a lot of joy in the classroom. So as I build resilience, I am happier. I am more patient. I am more hopeful for the future. And that has improved my teaching. And research indicates that resilient teachers who have these characteristics are better teachers because they are able to build that connection with their students. So that brings me to the next part. How do we develop this? If you are an English teacher or other type of teacher here today, and you're thinking about how can I develop this capacity for myself, I will have a few pointers for you. First of all, research indicates that teachers need to contend with stress, and we have a very stressful profession. And so, the first thing that we need to think about is how we can recognize what is within our control. And so, I have the sort of circles of control as a way of demonstrating this. The broadest circle is called the circle of concern. And these are things that we care about when we watch the news, when we look at the world, we notice, and we are concerned about politics, economics, the weather. You know, if there's a storm coming, we talk about it, we worry about it, and we respond to it. Pandemics, so many things like that that are completely out of our control. We cannot change the weather, but at the same time, the weather impacts us. And so that circle we can recognize is an area of concern. The next circle is called the circle of influence. And this is the type of thing that we care about, and we have some influence. We cannot directly change behavior, but we can advocate, we can teach, we can even ask for people to make changes in the circle of influence. So this includes your school's culture. You personally cannot change your school's culture 100%, but you can influence it. Similarly, your students' attitudes or their success, you cannot make your students be joyful, love learning, or succeed. They have to do the work, but you can absolutely influence that. And the final circle is the circle of control. And this is the area that you have direct action. Beyond influence, you control what happens in this circle. So this includes your actions, your thoughts, your response to other people, your attitude about things, and your enthusiasm about teaching, your enthusiasm about whatever it is in your life. And so between these three circles, sometimes if we face a challenge, we need to look at where the challenge fits in the circle. If it's in the circle of concern, we can pay attention, but we need to sort of let it go. If it's in the circle of influence, we can advocate and ask questions and try to use our influence, but then ultimately we let it go. But the circle of control is where we have the ability to take action and affect our own stress, right? We can choose our response, we can choose our attitude, and really change our stress levels. And maintaining or looking at where we see stress in our life is essential for preventing burnout and developing resilience. The next aspect is to create community. Teachers that have community are more resilient. And one way of thinking about community is through communities of practice. I could argue very much that today we are participating in a community of practice, especially for those of you asking questions and those of you who reach out to me later. We are able to develop a community where we share a concern and a passion and learn how to do it better and interact regularly. So the more you have that community of practice among your friends, among your colleagues, the more you will develop stress relief and resilience. Additionally, to develop resilience and resist stress and burnout, you should celebrate yourself and celebrate each other. So small successes, hard day in class, but you got through it, hooray. You won an award in your school or your colleague did, hooray, right? To recognize those tiny wins and those big wins and celebrate them with each other. Additionally, you'll want to pursue professional development, and all of you, checkmark, are doing that by participating today. That is a great way to resist stress and burnout because you know that you're in a community of others who care about the topic, and you often will learn a new point of view or a new perspective or a new tool that might help you with a challenge in your life. And then finally, it's really important to make time for your own hobbies, your own interests, your family, your friends. Find ways to sustain yourself as a person outside of your work. So in this case, I put a young woman baking. I enjoy baking a lot. I love photography. I love hiking, spending time with my kids. And so I make sure that I set boundaries. And when I'm working, I'm working. And when I'm not working, I'm focusing on the things that I enjoy. So stress is, the small things that affect us every day. Burnout is that overall feeling of emotional depersonalization, and it is sort of the extreme factor. So to prevent burnout, you really need to pay attention to your stress levels. If your stress is climbing, you need to let something go in your life so that you can tend to yourself so you don't get burned out. Another way to prevent burnout is to take true breaks. If you are on vacation, for example, many teachers get a summer vacation. Don't let teaching interfere with that time. Maybe you need to tutor or you enjoy tutoring on top of teaching. Try to find time when you are out of office. I know that many Europeans are much better than that as Americans, but it's a reminder for all of us to take true breaks. And then the final one that I like to think about is how to set loving boundaries. And I really gained this one from working with my children. I currently have a 2-year-old and she is delightful, but she loves to test all of my boundaries. And I've realized that setting strong boundaries with her is a way of showing how much I love her because it makes her day easier. She doesn't tantrum as much. I've applied it to my classroom. And now I recognize that being too flexible or too kind with my students can sometimes set them up for not pushing as hard. And so setting a boundary, no, you can't turn in that assignment. No, your behavior is unacceptable, helps them learn where they can push and where they have to change their behavior. So, the next component I want to talk about are the teaching practices for resilient schools and classrooms. The first concept I want to bring up is growth mindset because it's one that gets talked about a lot in this literature and it can be very, very helpful. Growth mindset is sort of resilience connected with motivation. And to define it, in some ways, it's the opposite of a fixed mindset. So I grew up, I had a second grade teacher who told me that I was really bad at math. And I heard her and I thought, I'm bad at math. And so I grew up with this attitude that I would never be good at math. That is a fixed mindset. And we probably have experiences like that in our lives where a teacher told us something about ourselves or we decided something about ourselves, and then we don't overcome that. I have since learned when I was in high school that I'm just fine at math. I'm not particularly good at fast math, but I'm very good at conceptual math, and I have learned to get over that. Now, I am an English professor, so I definitely didn't go into the profession. So, growth mindset can be defined as individuals who believe their talents can be developed through hard work, good strategies, and input from others. Those are individuals who have that growth mindset. So, hard work, good strategies, and input from others can help someone overcome the challenges they face. That sounds a lot like resilience. So, when we look at growth mindset, one key aspect is motivation. And the word I used is intrinsic motivation, which is acting for internal reasons. So, participating in a sport because it's fun, or learning a language because you enjoy it. Students who have intrinsic motivation are far more resilient and have more of a growth mindset. That stands in contrast to an extrinsic motivation, which is where people act for external reasons, like working hard in school so that you get a good grade, or learning a language so that you can get a good job. Now, those are good reasons to work hard in school and learn a language, but the motivation is different when you encounter a challenge. If you're thinking about just grades or money, that can make it hard to do the learning. But when you know that it's fun or there's enjoyment, that can sometimes help you through those challenges. So it's important to recognize and motivate students to have both intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Individuals who have a growth mindset believe that motivation can be nurtured and that extrinsic motivation can be internalized. So even if our students come to us wanting to earn more money or wanting to travel, we as teachers can help them develop that intrinsic motivation and the love and joy for what they are learning. Resilience requires motivation. That's the key thing here is that it requires effort to become resilient and to act resiliently. So again, to come back to these factors, individual and environmental factors, the key point I want to make is that as teachers and as school leaders, we in our circles of concern and influence, we can influence the school factors. We can create that environment for our students, but only the students can develop their own individual resilient factors. But the interplay between the two is what creates a resilient school. So to do this, we need to welcome students as people first and learners second. So I always remember at the beginning of every class to greet my students, to ask them how they're doing, to ask them what's going on in their lives beyond the classroom. And then we pivot to the work. Similarly, if a student reports that they're having a family challenge, I sit down and I talk with them about ways that they can meet their goals while adapting the curriculum rather than punishing them for being out of school, for example. Additionally, we need to get to know what motivates students and work with those motivations. I know many of you have a set curriculum that you need to work with, common among English teachers and all foreign language educators to have a set curriculum, but finding the spaces for adaptation to be able to maybe change the topic a little bit for students who are more into sports or tweak maybe a learning style activity. If your students really are physically active in the classroom, finding activities to channel that energy rather than just saying, quiet, sit down, quiet, right? Finding out what motivates those students. Always celebrate growth and successes. Again, the tiny successes, the big successes, find moments to celebrate because people feel good when they are recognized for their work. Don't be like my second grade math teacher or my second grade teacher. Don't tell your students that they're bad at something. Truly try to avoid labeling students with fixed attributes. So don't say, you're not good at that, you can't learn, you're terrible at XYZ, because students are already probably thinking negatively and they will absolutely internalize those attitudes. And finally, we should model reflection and metacognition, which I'll talk about in a moment, especially as related to overcoming challenges. I already see in the chat one question. Someone asked how I got into this work, and the core of my academic work has been related to reflection and metacognition. So, as a writing professor, English professor, I've done a lot of research on reflection and metacognition. So, reflection can be defined as a process for recognizing, understanding, and articulating one's accomplishment and challenges. So, reflection can be this process of thinking about, what have I learned? How am I learning? What have I done well? What have I not done well? And how have I grown over time? A reflection is also the products of that process. So you often hear the term reflection when you refer to like a document, a written reflection. But I would like to remind everyone that reflections can be conversations, they can be thinking aloud, they can be very social activities, and they are both process and products. Reflection is also not time bound. It isn't only about a particular moment. Reflection often looks backwards to see where we have been, but we should also take the time to look around at the present circumstances to see what we're feeling, what we're noticing right now. And we should also take moments to preflect, which is like looking forward to see what we might attain or what we might want to remember into the future. And so if you ever use reflection in the classroom, remember to always look back, look at the present, and look at the future. Metacognition is one of my favorite concepts because it is an umbrella concept. So the word metacognition means Meta is about something, cognition is thinking. So metacognition is thinking about thinking. And as I said, it's an umbrella term for lots of learning concepts related to growth and development of learning over time. So the first part is reflection, which I just talked about. Metacognition also includes self assessment, which might be before a test, checking in with yourself and say, how am I studying? Did I do a good job? Or after a test, did I score what I thought I would score on that test? How did I study correctly, or how might I study differently? Metacognition also includes emotional regulation. So being able to say to yourself, how am I feeling? Am I mad? Am I sad? Am I frustrated? Am I happy? Am I disappointed? Figuring out what feeling you're feeling and then being able to regulate that behavior, as we talked about earlier with resilience, kind of checking in with those feelings. And then metacognition also includes things like self efficacy and help seeking behavior, which are fancy phrases for the ability to say, I know how to do this, but I don't know how to do that. And when I don't know how to do that, I can ask for help. So knowing when you need to ask for help and knowing who to ask for help kind of covers self-efficacy and help-seeking behavior. Much research has shown that metacognition can be very important in helping students overcome gaps in learning. So even students who are not quite as smart or not quite as intuitively strong learners as other students, if they have metacognition, they can catch up with their peers. And also importantly, metacognition is not natural for all students, but it very much can be and should be taught in the classroom. I've done a bunch of research, as I indicated. So this QR code is related to an article I wrote in the last couple of years about teaching reflection and metacognition in the TESOL classroom. So if you want a direct link to that article, I think it's available to you all. If you find that it's not available to you, let me know and I can send you a PDF. I will give my email address at the end of the workshop today. So that includes sort of a framework for composing prompts related to reflection and metacognition. So in the last few moments I have before I turn to questions, I wanted to share some phrases and some ways that we can develop metacognition and reflection in the classroom with the end goal of developing resilience. So asking students, what did we study yesterday? What do you think we're going to study today? And how can you find the answer to that if a student doesn't know the answer? Where would you go? What can you do? You might ask students right when they finish a test, how did you do on your test? How did you study for it? And then when they get the results of an exam, you could ask them, how can you study better next time? These can be written, these can be conversations between you and the class or between peers. We can ask students at a midpoint check-in, what have we learned so far? What do you still want to learn? So that students can articulate what they're learning, and maybe there's a mismatch between what they've learned and what their goals are, and maybe you can help close that gap. And also, as a teacher, you really want to model positive self-talk. So if you are writing on the board, you might pause and say, what am I missing here? Right? So ask the students to catch your mistakes, or what strategies have we learned to solve this problem? Or even things as they're working along and you see their wheels turning, you can say, one step at a time, you're doing great, stick with it, right? That positive self-talk that you can verbalize as a teacher can then start to get in their heads so that when they're working and going through challenges, they start to have that narrative, that sort of audio tape running in their heads that can replace negative behavior, negative thoughts. So we've covered a lot today. I know I've probably spoken fast, but I believe you get a transcript. And of course, this is available for review. Today, we have looked at some of the issues facing students and teachers of the future. And I have shared one aspect that I think will help us all become better teachers as we continue to learn and grow and encounter challenges. And that is through developing resilience. And I showed a little bit of the research on resilience and why it matters. I talked about how to build teacher resilience by caring for ourselves and protecting against stress and burnout through building community, celebrating each other, advocating for each other, and building strong personal lives outside of the classroom. And then finally, I talked a little bit about teaching practices for schools and classrooms, getting to know our students, recognizing them as whole people, celebrating their accomplishments, and of course, developing this vocabulary and these practices of reflection and metacognition. So, with all of that information, I'm going to move to the Q&A portion. And I see several in the chat. This is a great time for you to share questions as well. So I would be happy to share the presentation. I didn't set it up just yet with an easy QR code, so I apologize. But you can reach out to me, or I can work with the American Center to find a way to share it with you. The next question is, by immersing in a new cultural and educational environment, students develop a broader perspective, gain intercultural skills, and become adaptable and resilient. I absolutely agree with that, that moving into a different cultural space, students will sort of have to develop resilience in order to thrive. I think this is the answer to some of the other questions as well. That when I have traveled abroad, I have developed those skills. So I see a question: have you ever been to Russia? Are you familiar with our educational system? To not get into complicated situations, I have not visited Russia. I have spent significant time in Ukraine as an English teacher. I taught there in the past for about 2 years. So I am familiar with the educational system, but that was about 20 years ago. And so not the educational reforms in Russia specifically, but I am familiar with the region writ large. I have also lived in Hungary and Great Britain, and so I am aware and attuned to international education throughout Europe and have a decent sense of the European system. Next question. One of my students said, nowadays we have Google Translate and other apps. Why do you try to teach us by torturing yourself and us? How would you answer this question? I actually love this question because right now, as we talk about AI and other tools that make teaching or make writing and producing information a lot easier, it does beg the question of what the role of an English language educator is. So, my answer to this is that when we're working with students, there are two challenges that they are facing. They are learning information, and that might be American culture, British culture, the culture of other parts of the world, as someone earlier talked about, sort of learning about different parts of the world, different ways people live. And then the second part is the writing, right? So there's the thinking and the learning, and then there's also then the language that you communicate in. And in order to produce written works, in order to have conversations with people in other parts of the world, you need to learn both of those. You need to learn the information about the language and culture, and you need to learn how to write or speak in it. And AI and translation tools make the writing part easier, right? It makes the ability to speak or write a lot faster and a lot easier. Although I might argue that using those might make it slower to actually be able to speak fluently or independently of a translation device. But it doesn't actually make the thinking work easier. You can't learn about American culture on Google Translate. You can't learn about the American education system on Google Translate, but Google Translate might help you do it faster or easier. And so when we disentangle those two things, we see that as English teachers, we absolutely have a role to play to help our students find the best resources, to use Google Translate effectively, and also to learn when they don't need to use Google Translate or they shouldn't use Google Translate, and when AI, other apps become a hindrance. If we spend our lives behind our phones, we are not interacting with other cultures and other people in the world. um, I haven't heard this specific phrase. I always hear traumatized people start as teachers. Is it true or just a myth? I think there's maybe two things going on. One, people who go into professions like education, nursing, and the medical system, psychology and therapy, counseling, um, first responders like firefighters, police officers, other types of first responders. People who choose to go into those professions are usually very caring people. And people who care are often empaths or empathetic, and we feel what other people feel. And that's really hard. And so we might have spent our whole lives caring about people, and then we go into a profession that cares about people. But then we're in a workplace where we might have bosses who don't care as much as we do, or we might have a hospital where they're trying to make money and they don't care as much as we do. And so it becomes very traumatizing to experience other people's worries and concerns and their traumas. It might be even death. We experience these really hard things, and we're so empathetic that if we don't have resilience, if we don't have community to support um, our own needs, then we might burn out and become traumatized. So I think that it's sort of a chicken or an egg problem where people who feel this way go into these professions and then it just continues on. Um, I love that I'm a caring person, and so for me, I have encountered burnout and then had to stop myself to protect myself so that I could be a caring member of my family. Um, so I think that there may be a nugget of truth to this phrase, but I also think it's a myth because teachers are always learning. And if we consider ourselves to be continual learners, then we can develop the resilience to be caring and be loving and be joyful without becoming too traumatized. Okay. So thank you for your research. If we speak about Russian education, is it possible to acquire resilience in Russian schools? I can say two things about this. First, there is a whole thread of research being conducted in Russia about resilient schools. And that research is primarily related to that definition about students in disadvantaged environments, so low economic status or families and other cultural factors that make it challenging for them to learn. Those students and those schools having high educational outcomes. So there are definitely already resilient schools in Russia by that definition. Um, and what's interesting is those schools are resilient because of their teachers. It is not related to having more funding. It is related to dedicated teachers, dedicated staff, dedicated families who care about their students. And so some of the resources that I talked about today were drawn from that research conducted in Russia. The second thing I want to say about this is I have been working with some Russian teachers, and as I've been sharing these educational practices, they already do many of them. Um, we as a group can recognize that there are teachers who don't do these practices in Russian schools. Similarly, there are teachers who don't do these practices in American schools, and it can definitely be a challenge. But for teachers who want to have the best for their students, they want to develop, those high learning outcomes for their students while being joyful and loving, it absolutely can be done in individual classrooms and in individual schools. So it's already happening, and absolutely in that individual level, it can be done beyond that. This is another great question. Thank you all for such specific and wonderful questions. Um, I think the best strategies to develop intrinsic motivation are to create spaces where students have the time and the trust to explore what they care about. So I teach an academic writing course. for students at my university. And they come into the class and they think they're going to write very structured academic essays. But research indicates that just writing a very specific type of essay does not make a student a better writer. What makes a student a better writer is writing more and learning the genres and learning how to understand what a professor wants from you. And so instead of telling my students what to write and what I want to see, I say to students, what do you want to write? What topic, what genre helps you meet your goals? What is it that you want to do? And then I coach the students. I help the students write to meet their goals. And at first, they don't believe me. They're like, wait, I don't have to write an academic essay? No, write what you want. Or what topic do you want me to write about? I don't care. What do you want to write about? Can I write about a film I like? Yeah, write about a film you like. Now, you have to write it like a real film review. Like, I don't make it too easy. I push them, but I'm open to what they care about. And after the first assignment, and they learn to trust me that I'm really, that's really true, that they can write about what they want to write about, they start to produce stronger and stronger work. Then I can work on things like how to do academic citation or how to write good thesis sentences. The things that we as teachers know need to happen. Once they're inspired to write about things that they're excited to write about, then I can come in and intervene and help teach the skills that they need to learn and grow. And it becomes more intrinsically motivated, it becomes more implicit and intuitive. So that's what I have found is looking for opportunities to get to know your students and let them write about, speak about, learn about what they want to write about, learn about, or speak about. And so, even in a space where you might have a very structured curriculum, this day you need to study this topic and this grammar point, if it's a 5-minute warm up, or maybe changing the content of some of the readings so that it's about something they're more excited about, finding ways to show them that you see who they are as people and you care about who they are as people can really help them feel like the classroom is a fun space. Also, doing things that like make them laugh, play games when you can, things that just bring joy among students. It just makes the class much more fun and much more intrinsically motivated. How do you cope with students who are constantly late? This is can be a challenge. I think the first thing that is important to do is find out what's going on and find out in a way that is appropriate for the student and for your school. So this might require talking to the student when they come in or after class. Probably don't embarrass them in front of the class, but just pull them aside. What's going on? Are you okay? I've noticed that you're late regularly and it's disrupting the class and it's preventing you from learning. Can you talk to me a little bit about what's going on? When you do that, you might learn that they're just hanging out outside and they don't care. You might learn that they're actually helping their sibling get somewhere or they're worried about their parents. You might learn that something major is going on. So, sort of column one, it may be that there's something traumatic in their life or something serious that's demanding their attention, and that's why they're late. That is very different from the student who's just outside hanging with their friends and they don't care. If it's the trauma situation, you might then turn to school administrators or the class teacher to work with them to find a way to help them meet their needs, or maybe allow them to be late sometimes if they have maybe a special late pass, or finding a way to let them meet their needs. If the student doesn't care and that's why they're late, that's where you might ask them, okay, so you're hanging out outside with your friends. It's really disruptive to the class. I care about you. I would like this class to be useful and enjoyable for you. Is there a change I can make that would make this class more interesting for you? And often when you get the disinterested, unmotivated kids, it's because they're like either trying to be cool or Maybe they feel left out or maybe bullied. So again, finding out, is it a they feel bullied and want to avoid the class? And that might require you to make them sit somewhere else or change something about their classmate interactions. And if they're a kid who's just trying to be super cool, coming in late, then you might put them in a leadership role or something in the class, right? Turn it on its head. They might be a bad student who's coming in late. So maybe you give them a leadership role at the beginning that then lets them be cool in your class. So the answer to this is really figuring out what's going on. Now, I'm not perfect. I don't have endless capacity. And as I said earlier, I set really, really strong boundaries. And so sometimes a student just has to be late and they just get bad marks and it's fine. And I can't be kind and loving for everybody all of the time. So sometimes you just have to let it go. And sometimes there's a way to intervene and help them get better. And you have your own judgment of which is going to be better there. This is a good question. So I would say that right now, the defining educational experience has been the COVID-19 pandemic because it changed teaching in so many ways. And for some students and some teachers, it developed a lot of resilience. I came to the world of resilient teaching, trauma informed teaching because of the pandemic, because I was in a situation where I had to do my best, and the normal ways I had been teaching didn't work anymore. So it was like I could either break and fall apart and become a horrible teacher, or I could adapt and become a good teacher. And I did that and it worked. So for me, the pandemic was a really illuminating experience. And I think there are many students that learned how to overcome challenges through that, but I also see a lot of students who are still struggling. And in much of the world, we all have said, that's done. That's in hindsight. And students, families, teachers are still struggling. We are tired. We have cared so much that a lot of us have not filled up our care buckets again. And so we might be struggling. And schools ask more and more of us all the time as they are struggling sometimes with resources after the effects of the pandemic and other challenges in the world. You know, the US has faced a lot of natural disasters in the last few years. We are struggling in a lot of ways. And I think that that's a challenge that we're still figuring out how to work through. This doesn't quite answer the question. So, to answer the question specifically, what are some practices or experiences have really helped us develop resilience? I think one, my students tell me that the thing I do most that helps them is to care about them as people. And I do that by being vulnerable myself. So this semester, I missed a class because I was out sick. And so I just said, like, I'm sorry, I'm out sick. I can't be there. I had a medical issue in the family that I explained. I'm changing the class in these ways because I need to be a caregiver for someone in my family. During midterms, when they walk in, I say, how are you doing? How are your other classes? And when they look at me very, very tired, I might say, okay, today we're going to make it a little bit easier, and we're going to do more fun things. We're going to listen to music in the classroom because I see that you are tired. So greeting them as people and supporting them when they're not feeling well, changing the class a little bit to help them feel good about the learning. Coloring pictures. College students love to color. I'm sure that your primary and secondary students also would love to color, listen to music. Sometimes that can really help their emotional regulation and develop resilience. So I think that is the sort of complicated, easy answer, that seeing students as people, recognizing them as people with human needs, responding to that, And then getting to the business of learning has been the number one thing my students have told me that I have done. So as I mentioned, in my career, I taught English abroad, lived in a few different countries, came back to the United States, got my master's degree in teaching English to speakers of other languages. Um, Through that process, and then when I continued into my PhD to obtain my doctorate, I started to research reflection and metacognition. So, reflective writing, especially at transition moments. So, I was researching how international students transition from high school or secondary school abroad and then come into a US university. And I researched whether or not teaching metacognition and learning concepts and reflective writing would help them in that transition. And what I found was yes, being reflective, modeling reflection, modeling metacognitive behavior helps students during learning transitions. And so, as my career has evolved, as I've learned more about social emotional learning, trauma, experienced the pandemic, experienced personal challenges in my life, I have come to recognize the role reflection and metacognition play in developing resilience. And so that's how I've arrived to where we are today. Yeah. So this question right now, what if students don't want to write anything? They say they haven't chosen English as their exam, so they wouldn't like to do anything that will reduce their points. I would say this specific question is contextual, right? I don't know the exact setup of what exactly you're talking about. I'm guessing that this may be a situation where a student or a group of students is in English class because it's required, but they're not going to have exams on it. And so there's no extrinsic motivation to learn. And so they don't want to learn. They don't see the extrinsic motivation. And so why would they learn in your class? And so that's something that may require reflection as a teacher to think about what's possible in your classroom. I teach a class that is required for all students at my university that is on writing. And many students don't think they need it. Many students don't want to be there and they don't care. And I walk in on the first day and I say, "Hi, I'm your writing professor. We are in a class that is required. I'm required to teach you. You're required to learn. So, how can we make this as fun as possible?" And then we build a class that way. Um, you may be able to do that, but you may have a government required curriculum that doesn't allow you to do that too much. It may still be useful to just say it. So that may be one way of getting at that. I see we're approaching the end of our time. So I wanted to show the very last slide, which has my contact information. So again, thank you so very much for your time today. Um, I, again, am associate professor at Elon University. And my contact information is jeidum at elon.edu. That's pronounced Jennifer Eidum. Feel free to reach out to me, and I will see if I can't share some resources with you through another pathway. So thank you all very, very much. And I really appreciate the American Center for setting up this International Education Week series of presentations and for allowing me to speak with you today. I'm very passionate about international education, about reflection and metacognition, and about English teachers. I think this is a fantastic profession. I think you and we are all doing really important work in the world. And that work is more fun when we have a community. So I hope to work with some of you possibly in the future, to hear from some of you, and I wish you well in all of your work. Thank you for your time.